So I was watching these old school K-dramas that I watched when I was a kid, and I'm like bawling my eyes out. Like I needed a towel. I needed a towel to catch my tears and snot.
Hi, everybody. This is Getting Woke with Dr. Chi. In today's episode, I continue my discussion with Dr. Grace Jung, in which we talk about how she does all of the things, how she got her PhD while she was a touring comedian, and we also discuss a variety of other things, including Korean variety shows. We also talk about people dying on the set of filming K-dramas. And we talk about this before Alec Baldwin, the actor, accidentally shot somebody on set and killed them. So I think that this episode is very timely in light of issues of unionization, both in Korea as well as in the United States and Hollywood. And we also talk about how you convert Korean letters or Hangul. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you can keep up with all the ways that you can get what with Dr. Chi. So I hope that you enjoy this episode, and here you go. My first question for you is, how do you find the time to do all of the things? You do so many things. How did you write a PhD while you were working as a stand-up comedian and hosting a podcast?
Yeah.
Explain this.
Well, right now I'm unemployed, so I'm
Mhm.
not working, so I have the time to work on my podcast and edit and work on my films. And the thing is, like, I'm always working on multiple things at once. I've always been doing that. I think a lot of women are good at multitasking, right? Like, it's just kind of the rhythm of our lives, really. Some of it is motivated by impatience, like kind of throwing a bunch of different things at the wall, like waiting for something to stick. The other thing the other thing that motivates all my different creative pursuits is just I have to do them. Like, I just do them because I feel I feel compelled to do them. And if I'm like, oh, like I kind of want to do that, then I'll just go and do it without wondering like, how's that going to impact this or that? Like, and I usually find that that's the best way to pursue anything creative. Um, and time wise, I mean, with stand-up comedy, there's a lot of waiting time. Like, you're waiting for somebody to finish their set so you could go up on stage. Or if you're at a mic, sometimes that could last hours. So there's a lot of, you know, uh, I didn't dwell time, just lounge time, like sitting around waiting. And during those times, I would just have my laptop with me, or I would have a
Wait, so
book.
you were like on JSTOR, like looking for articles while you're like
Yeah,
waiting to go up to
yeah,
perform?
no lie. Like, probably not researching, but I would bring a book. Like, I'm like, oh, I didn't get through this book for my literature review, so let me take this book with me. Or I would take like a printout of an article I'm working on, and I would edit it while I'm standing in line, and that, like, that really adds up. That time adds up. And I was also very determined to finish my dissertation as soon as possible. I didn't want to be one of those PhDs that are just sitting around waiting for their dissertation to get finished and not writing it, Like, my advisor, Chon Noriega, he was very sort of, he was like a good coach. He was like, people are afraid of writing, but the only way to get rid of that fear is just to write. Actually, he didn't say that. I said that. He said, if you don't write, you get really good at not writing. That's what he said. And
Mm.
I was like, that's good. So I changed it to, like, sometimes I'm afraid to approach my writing because, like, I'm afraid I'm going to get stuck, or I'm afraid that I'm not going to have new ideas, or I'm afraid that I'm going to hate what I'm looking at. The only way to get rid of that fear is to actually face it, right? And it's not like I have kids. I don't have children, I don't have like a partner. I don't have family to take care of. So I was like, it's really on me. And I do want to tell everybody it is doable.
So you earned your PhD from UCLA studying, and you wrote a dissertation about Korean variety shows. Is that
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Can you tell me, like, what were your major findings? Like, what were you, proposing in your dissertation, and what were your findings?
Yeah. So I grew up watching South Korean variety shows since I was a kid, and they're comedic in nature. It was like a very much like a family ritual, like on the weekends, on Saturday or Sundays, like my mom would bring home a VHS tape and we would like watch it together as a family. You know, this is something I keep coming back to. Like I keep watching these shows as a way of comfort. One big finding that I came out with is that it's a big satire on how we live our lives in these capitalist economies. So um, there's this show called Infinite Challenge, for instance, and it has got like all these like men, you know, they're men in their 30s primarily, and they're like fighting, you know, competing in these gamified competition games. They're fighting to the teeth for something as ridiculous as like a banana or like bragging rights, you know, something really trivial, right? But they'll literally break bones to fight and compete. This comes from Japan originally. In the late 90s and early 2000s, South Korea really had some excellent studio variety shows with celebrities, and that was like a big hit among the youth because they get to see their favorite K-pop stars doing these ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
games, and it was this way of kind of like humanizing these stars that felt like unreachable. And anyway, the gamification part, that it's a satire on like how we sort of go to the ends of the earth just to get a paycheck, right? A lousy boss, you know, a colleague who says inappropriate things, whether it's microaggressive or a little sexual assaulty, whatever it might be, you know, uh, taking a really lousy paycheck, you know, but still dealing with all the BS. I mean, that's something all of us do. And when I was
Mm-hmm.
watching Squid Game, I saw this very apparent in there too. I was like, oh, like all of these games are inspired by South Korean variety shows, these game shows. And I was like, okay, so that's interesting. The message is the same. But my main focus was masculinity and queerness in these variety shows. Like gay gay people, trans people, they're not very readily apparent in Korean television. Um, and there are many reasons for that. Mostly, like the biggest excuse that they have is, well, these need to be family friendly shows. So the implication
Mm-hmm.
is that anybody who is not hetero is not necessarily family friendly, right? I mean,
And
that's
they
in
don't
an
have families.
right. As if LGBTQIA people don't come from families, as if they didn't have a childhood.
Right.
And I even looked at the Broadcasting Act of South Korea, and I was looking. They were like, "Oh, we do not discriminate against, you know, um, people who are not Korean, people who are elderly, women. We do not discriminate against people with disabilities." But LGBTQIA is totally ignored in that list of um, rights protections. And so I was like, but this the show itself is very queer, you know, like there's a lot of queerness there. For instance, all the cast members are male, so you got homosociality right there. And you know, they'll do a
Wait,
lot
you have
of
to define homosociality here because
oh, okay.
everybody knows what that means.
Yeah. It just means like, you know, everybody's the same gender. And so the potential of, you know, homo relations or like queer relations is present there. So homosocial just meaning they're going to exclude other genders and just remain their one gender. So that's what it means. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, but oftentimes in queer theory, we say that the queer potential is there. So
Okay.
got that going on. And then there's a lot of drag performance because they're in a homosocial cast. So you have all these men, but they have skits and sketches in these variety shows. So some of the men will dress in, you know, in drag. They'll wear wigs and makeup and dresses and heels, and they'll fully perform a female gender. And all of that is hyped up as comedic in nature. But, you know, the question becomes like, where in this text can we find liberatory avenues for queer thinking? So that's really at the heart of my dissertation, this exploration of what this genre is as this queer viewing. Yeah.
Got you. Interesting. But
Mm,
if you were going to give me like an elevator pitch, like we're going to the fifth floor, the
hmm
fourth floor, and
hmm
so it was like, "Hey, what do you study, Grace Jung, Dr. Jung? What's your dissertation about?" What would you say? And they're like, "Oh, four."
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you tell
No,
them?
that's a lot harder. I just tell them it's The dissertation's on Korean variety shows and explores masculinity, queerness, and nationalism. Just very simply like that.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. Got you.
Hmm.
So those are like the keywords that somebody would type in to find your dissertation.
Basically, yeah, those three things. Yeah.
So, I don't know if you know this, but I've become a huge Korean drama fan.
There's no,
What would you think would enhance our appreciation for a K drama or for K
yeah.
dramas?
Yeah. I mean, Korean dramas have a diversity of genres. So if you like romantic comedies, there's so many romantic comedies. If you like thrillers, there are a lot of thrillers nowadays. If you like horror, a lot of horror stuff. If you like cop and cops like detective stuff, there's that. There's hospital playlists if you're into the whole hospital soap genre thing. So go with whatever you feel the most comfortable and familiar with. So if there's a K-pop star you dig, go see what soundtracks they did for which Korean dramas and go check that out.
Thanks for that. That's really useful.
Yeah.
I think that's how well, I got started because Netflix kept recommending this show called Chocolate to me. I'm like, I like chocolate,
What
but
did you
why do they
think
keep
of
calling
that
me
show?
chocolate? Well, apparently I liked it enough because I kept watching Korean dramas.
Wow. Yeah, yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, well, I think maybe they're like, oh, she's okay with subtitles because, like,
Yeah.
watch a lot of
Oh,
stuff from Latin America and Spain.
interesting.
Like, okay,
Yes.
subtitles don't intimidate her,
Yes.
and she's okay with stuff that's like non-European.
Yes.
So I watch
Yes.
a decent amount of Nollywood, and like,
Yeah.
you like food, chocolate.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
finally the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, fine, let me
Yeah.
hit
Yeah.
play on chocolate. And I was like, I think that's Korean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I got sucked into
Yeah.
this like really depressing show
It's
about,
so
you
depressing.
know,
She cried so
hospital.
much. She was
And
crying in every episode.
and I loved it. And I think it's exactly what I needed during the pandemic because
Yeah.
I was far from my family. I was living in
Mm.
New Jersey and I have an
Mm-hmm.
autoimmune illness, so I wasn't trying to
Mm.
be around people. And
Yeah.
this was like maybe February, no, March of last year. So we didn't know
Wow.
anything about
No.
COVID.
It was a rough
And so
time.
I was like, stay away from everybody. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, so many people are gonna die because our
Yes.
president is trash, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
And she's like, why are we like having
Uh-huh.
states fight over PPE with the federal government? I
Yeah.
was sad. But I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
admit that to myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like the show allowed me to cry while
Uh-huh.
trying to work out on my elliptical
Mm-hmm.
machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know,
I
it
think
got
that's
me through it.
huge. That cathartic affective sort of functioning that Korean dramas have just bodily for us. Like I was doing the same thing in March when, like early March, I still had my hopes up because I was planning a tour in April in Denver. And I was
Mm.
like, all right, I'm so excited for this tour. I've been, working on it for months. And all throughout March, I was like, no, like this shit's gonna blow over in a couple weeks. 3 weeks
Mhm.
tops. Like that's literally what I
Mhm.
was thinking. And the news keeps happening. The days go by, it gets worse and worse. And it's like, that's not going to happen. And as that reality sinking in, even though I couldn't admit it to myself in words, I was crying nonstop. And I was watching a lot of Korean dramas, especially like old school Korean dramas. Like, you think Chocolate is bad? At least Chocolate has a happy ending. So I was watching these old school K dramas that I watched when I was a kid, and I'm like bawling my eyes out. Like I needed a towel. I needed a towel to catch my tears and snot, and I'm like bawling, bawling my eyes out. And I needed that. I needed to release all that tension and disappointment and that
Yeah.
sadness and sorrow and that fear and that uncertainty. All of us, we kept saying it's the end of the world. Remember, like back then we
Yeah.
kept saying it's the end of the times. I thought it was so interesting how you said like, oh, Netflix can identify that you're not afraid of subtitles. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? I think that is
Yeah.
so interesting and important because yeah, there is this xenophobia when it comes to movies with subtitles. Like I noticed this is a very American thing. Like I remember in high school, like I had seen an awesome French film and I was telling my friends about it, and they're like, "Oh, but it has subtitles. I'm not gonna watch it." I was like, "Why? Like you know how to read?" And they're like, "I don't." they're like, I can't read and watch things at the same time. I'm like,
Mhm.
that is such a weird excuse, you know? And if
Mhm.
they latch onto that excuse, then they're missing a whole, like, the rest of the world, really, you know? Any
Totally.
non-English
Yeah.
speaking text is just excluded from their list, and I'm like, man, that is sad and weird. But yeah, like, that xenophobia is real, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
That phobia of it, I'm just going to call it xenophobia, because to me that's just a weird excuse to be like, I don't want to read and watch at the same time. I say it's a form of xenophobia to be like,
I think it's I agree with you to some extent because on the other hand, I know there's a lot of Americans like my mom for whom English is not her mother tongue.
yeah,
And so watching something with in English where people are talking in another language and she has to read in
right,
English can
right.
be a lot for her.
In
Yeah,
fact,
yeah.
for you know, immigrant parents like you and I, they need to have English subtitles while watching English language movies. Like, that actually
Hmm.
helps, in fact.
Yeah.
And at UCLA, whenever we would show films, we would oftentimes play it with closed captioning, so to first accommodate folks with hearing disability, but also for the international students whose first language is not English. Like,
Hmm.
seeing movies with the subtitles help them immensely. So
Hmm.
that's a really important point. Yes.
And that's very different from people who are like, I just can't be bothered. It's like, well,
Yeah.
how are you gonna watch Amelie?
Exactly. What a great film. Yeah.
How are you
Yeah.
gonna watch La Vida es Bella? Life is Beautiful. I watched it when I was in the
Yeah.
UK. I was like, yeah, I
Amazing
can watch that.
movie. Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
they're not. Or maybe they got dubbed. I don't know. Not my problem. That's on them. But yeah,
Right.
so yeah, Netflix was like, oh, you're okay with dubs. Here's
Mm-hmm.
something you might be interested in. You like chocolate. I'm like, yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
But also, I was in this moment where I was like, I'm tired of watching white people do all of the things. So I was like,
Yeah.
and I was supposed to go to Spain to visit my friend Goretti, and I was going to go to Nigeria to visit my family there.
Wow.
Couldn't go. Couldn't go to Nigeria to be with my family there. It's like, oh, I'm
Mm.
stuck in this country. Well, how am I going to leave this country? Let me
Yeah.
watch some foreign stuff. So I was watching
Yes.
some Brazilian stuff, some Nollywood stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
then, some Korean dramas. So I feel like I've learned a lot of new terms though, like watching
Mm-hmm.
Korean dramas, like the term romanization. I didn't realize it was like a thing to think about people's names and languages not being in a Roman like ABCDEFG like
Uh-huh.
language. And
Uh-huh.
it's like, well, okay, so I like this guy. He's really fine in
Uh-huh.
Crash Landing on You and Memories
Oh
of the
yeah.
Alhambra.
Hyunbin. Yeah.
How do you say his name?
Hyunbin.
Memories of the Alhambra. Google it, and like
Yeah.
I remember initially trying to just spell it, and there was like
Yeah.
different ways that people were spelling his name,
Uh-huh.
and finally figured out how we spell it here in the West. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh snap, this is
Yeah.
tough.
Even my last name, it's Jung, and it's pronounced Chung in Korean. But a lot of Koreans have also, even though the exact same last name, they'll write it out as Chung, Chung. And yeah, romanization is definitely a thing. There are two kinds of romanizations in the Korean language. One is the McCune Reischauer system. The other is the revised. And like, honestly, no fucking Korean goes around thinking about this. I'll tell you this right now. The only people who care about this and give a shit and make these distinctions are scholars. Okay. So
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I'm gonna say on this podcast right now, don't go up to your Korean friend and be like, do you know how you romanize your name? Nobody knows and nobody cares. It's like whatever that immigration officer wrote out, that's what I went with, you know? So yeah, like, a lot of these inconsistencies happen because of this confusion with, like, the parents themselves not knowing, oh, how should I write it out, and then them asking a friend and it's random as that, or an immigration officer writing whatever out, it's as random as that, and sometimes it gets
Mhm.
stuck. So yeah, like, the only reason why I talk about it more is because I just happen to be aware of it, just FYI.
And I'm somebody who cares a lot about linguistics. I
Mm,
studied at university what they like. I ended up taking classes on linguistics in like three different areas. Like,
yeah.
so I'm like, I'm always thinking about language. Like, how does that language work? How do you spell? Why do you spell like
Yes.
that? You're right.
Yes.
Don't ask your Korean friends
Yeah.
or your Korean
Because they're
neighbors
just like,
or people you
what?
just know. Like, leave them alone. Let
They have
them.
no idea what revised or McCune, they're like, who's McCune? Like they don't know or care. It's really like for academic purposes. It really is.
Uh-huh.
And in academia, a lot of the Koreanist scholars, they write in McCune Reischauer.
So I'm not going to ask you about Squid Game and like, why is it so popular? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's popular because
Yeah.
it's a good story, as you
Yeah.
said recently.
Yeah.
And that like, it's a great story. It resonates with people,
Uh-huh.
period, right?
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you
Mm-hmm.
about um the potential Netflixization of Korean
Mm-hmm.
dramas. It seems as though with Netflix, there's like even more gore and violence. Like I'm no longer seeing that knife blurred out. I was wondering if you think there might be something happening with Netflix in which there's like either creating more hybrid forms of the genre
Mm-hmm.
between films and
Mm-hmm.
dramas or doing something completely different. What do you
Mm-hmm.
think about that?
The thing people have to understand is in South Korea, even cable channels, they censor everything. Anything that's going to be broadcast or narrowcast on television, they do have to have the family locks in place. Although
Mm.
on cable channels, they will be slightly more lenient. Content wise, they'll push it a little bit, but they're not going to show excessive sex and gore and violence. And they're definitely not going to swear. I mean, they're going to try to swear in different ways, but like ultimately, they're not going to say certain words.
Wait, they're not swearing on those Korean dramas, like
Nope.
even cable ones?
Those are liberations that the translators took. But Netflix, because it's online, when it comes to online streaming content, there are no rules. Okay. So you can have a lot of sex, you can have gore, you can have like knife stabbings, you can have that. Because it's not beholden to the same censorship laws as television in South Korea. So on Netflix, since it's online and it's not a Korean platform, they're just like, just do whatever. And a lot of these Korean filmmakers are being offered these kinds of gigs, like Squid Game, like that. He's Hwang Dong-hyuk is a filmmaker, right? So in filmmaking, South Korean laws don't limit anything. You can. That's why a lot of
Oh,
South Korean films are highly hypersexualized, and there's a lot of violence and gore, and there's a lot of misogyny there too. It's like this repressed male sexuality that just like goes haywire on in Korean cinema. So you have that, and then they say like make it into a TV show. We'll give you the resources, we'll give you the platform, and so like Netflix becomes this um playground for them to do all the things that they want to do that they can't do in Korean television. So
mm,
it's very new. It's been less than 5 years that South Korea's had Netflix.
okay.
So the problems that I see is that South Korea is not they're not equipped to handle seasons. South Korean television industry production companies, cast members, crew members, they do not do seasons. But Netflix does sort of have this expectation or demand of seasonal work because Netflix is from America and Hollywood does have seasons, right? South Korea doesn't have any unions when it comes to industry workers. That's a big
None
problem.
whatsoever.
None, zero unions. I was in South Korea doing field work for my dissertation, and that was like the biggest thing I asked. And they were like, we don't have unions. We have like organizations like within us, but in the
Mhm.
department, that's not a union. That's not a union at
No.
all. Nope, there's no power there. Union has to be like anybody who works in production, then they are all part of this same union. Uh, and that's the reason why you had two people die on the set of Kingdom, which is a Netflix production. Okay, that's a
You know,
Netflix Korean drama production. Two people died because there were no labor laws in place.
I did not, so I never watched Kingdom because I can't do
Hmm.
zombie
Yeah,
movies, but
yeah,
I heard you mention that on your podcast, K-drama school, and
yeah,
I was like, wait, what? People died while filming a TV show?
yeah.
What the hell?
It happens. I mean, people die in Hollywood production sets too, but not as often. And it's really horrible. It's really horrible. but yeah, it's usually like the deaths in South Korea, it's usually a product of being overworked. In Hollywood, it's unionized and there are laws in place. Like you have to get at least 8 hours of sleep. If the crew has to get 8 hours of sleep, so they can't, if they do overtime, then the next day they're going to start later because that 8 hours of sleep has to be guaranteed, right? For their safety.
Right.
Um, we're fed every 3 to 4 hours. So there are these laws in place, and it's America, so everybody's afraid of getting sued, right? But in South Korea, it's like it's really that really needs to change. We are not beholden to America's standards. Netflix keeps saying, oh, look at South Korea, like we gave South Korea a big opportunity. I'm like, maybe South Korea gave Netflix a big opportunity through really cheap labor, through really cheap content, okay, and content that is making Netflix history, this intersect of neoliberal thinking with neo-colonial kinds of concepts. Like that's so visible in how Netflix and Korean dramas are functioning right now, and it's dysfunctional. If South Korea were to be like, we're going to launch our own global streaming platform only with Korean dramas, and we're going to take back all the content from Disney Plus, from Netflix, from Viki. We're going to take it all back and just do it. South Korea would be bawling. They think they need America. And at this point, they don't. They don't. It's very apparent that they don't.
It seems like you're also saying this like an issue of organizing in
Yeah.
Korea, like not only
Yes.
like among workers on the ground, but also among all these stations who are producing all
Hmm.
this content, which
Yeah.
is why I canceled, but I'm gonna probably start up my Viki subscription again. 'Cause I do love that.
Yeah, Vicky. Yeah. I mean, um, you don't have to, like what I do is I watch all my Korean dramas for free right now on Drama Cool. And,
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea how they do it, but they're doing it. I'm sure it's
I don't
illicit.
either.
But I just install ad blockers on one of my browsers, the browsers that I don't use often. And then
Mm-hmm.
I just watch whatever it is that I want to catch up on or revisit. I just watch it on that for now.
I heard Drama Cool's really good with translations as well. That like I'm watching Yumi Cells and it
Uh-huh.
takes them forever to get to like 100%,
Yeah.
translations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because that's the other thing. Like, we can only subscribe to so many things, right? Like, each
Yeah.
platform has. As soon as I heard Disney Plus was starting to acquire Korean dramas, I was like, "Fuck my life!" That's
Yeah.
come on, come on. When is this gonna stop? And it's not gonna stop. It's gonna keep going as long as South Korean production companies allow it. It's gonna keep going. You know,
You're right.
I really hope they really wake up and just smell the coffee and really understand their worth. As long as like we're not white and cis and man and hetero, we get to ask for more. We need to ask for more.
Thanks for getting woke with me today. I hope that you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please like and subscribe. Be sure to share this episode with your friends, your lovers, your enemies, your frenemies, and anybody else who you think might be interested. I hope that you have a wonderful week and take care.